lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and with me today, I have an indie comic legend with me. I have Shannon Wheeler, the creator of Too Much Coffee, man. And it is an extreme pleasure to be able to talk with you today, man, because I mean, I just from like when I first saw that drawing when I was a kid, when I was younger, and then to now, it's really cool to be able to talk comics with you, man. So welcome.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Before we get into Too Much Coffee, man, I want to talk to you. I always like hearing, the stories of like what inspired you to become a creator yourself and to put out your own work and, kind of maybe some of artistic inspirations and some of your like favorite comics growing up that kind of sparked that love.
Comics were always magic to me, where I would read them and just couldn't figure out how someone could communicate a time inside of a frozen drawing, and just that shift from one panel to the next, and then all of a sudden you have the story in your head. That was just an amazing thing to me, and it was just magic. It was like seeing a magician pull a rabbit out of the hat, and you're just like, where'd the rabbit come from? Well, as a kid, it's just an amazing, and then I think it was watching like a 60 Minutes or something, and watching Charles Schultz just sitting down at his drawing table, and he just started drawing, and he just said, yeah, here's the first panel, and it was Snoopy in the doghouse. Second panel is a little bit of snow falling. Third panel is he's covered in snow, and then the last panel is him saying drats or something. And it was the Rosetta Stone for me, where all of a sudden I saw like, oh, you do it by just doing it, and not you just sit down and draw, and then you have the story. Like, and the love and ease that he had communicated directly to me as a kid, and I was like, oh, I want to do this same magic.
So when did you like first like break onto the scene? Because like I said, I saw Too Much Coffee, man. I can't remember where I saw it, but I was young when I first saw it, and I eventually, picked up some of the stuff as I got older, and I just love the concept of this guy that drink, you just drink as a coffee cup. I mean, I love coffee. I'm highly addicted to coffee. I cannot start my day like, don't even talk to me until I've had a cup of coffee. Like that's how crazy I am about it. So I want to know, like, how did the idea for the character come about? And in turn, like, did you self-publish it to begin with? Is that how you started?
Yes. I was drawing. I drew cartoons for my school paper at Berkeley, and then I moved to Texas and drew cartoons in the Daily Texan. And the list of cartoonists that were at the Texan is just it's an A-list, and it was just an amazing group of people. I mean, Chris Ware, Robert Rodriguez, who does he's a movie director now, like Tom King, Walt Holcomb, Matt Madden, Jeanette Moreno. Like, everybody was good. It was really a trip. I mean, it was just a lucky, weird time. And every day the paper came out, and people, you'd meet somebody at a party, and what cartoon is yours? Like, oh, I do the one with the talking dog, and they're like, oh yeah, I think I know that one, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I wanted to do something iconic, and then I just worked on icons and thinking, what do people do? And breathe, have cats. I'm sitting in a coffee shop, so it's just in my face, and I'm, pounding back my giant cappuccino, giant lattes, and then I was like, oh, coffee, and so I was like, oh yeah, let me make fun of myself for this. And so it came out of a real self-mockery. Then people were like, what do you do? Oh, I do Too Much Coffee, man. Oh, you're the and it was amazing. But then it became a curse, because then that's all I was known for a long time. And then I had to, like, how do you escape the Kiss makeup? Oh, you're the guy in Kiss. Like, no, I sell condoms, or I don't know. I'm a total asshole. But yeah, it came from that of like wanting to do something over the top and silly, and then thinking like, okay, how can I do this and still have it be something I love? And I folded in a lot of autobiographical elements, and just I made it philosophical because that's what interests me.
Yeah, I mean, and the response to that, I mean, I have I think I'm pretty sure it's a reprint of number one when he faces off against trademark copyright man, which fucking was laughing my ass off like, reading it. But not only did like was the story really funny, but then you have like letters in the back from like Chester Brown and cartoonists. So, or did they give you those letters to print, or were those actual letters that they sent off to you? I was just really curious.
The Peter Bag letter is real. Like
Okay.
I sent my mini comics out because before I did the comic book, I started doing these mini comics and selling those. And then my buddies and I got together, and one of them, he'd moved into a house that a printer used to live at. And so there was a printing press in the house. And we were all doing comics, and we are like, oh, let's print up comic books and sell them. So we had this little collective of friends. So I sent out these mini comics to all the comic book publishers and creators, and then Peter Bagg wrote back that letter of what do you say? I appreciate the craft, but I hate superheroes so much that I hate parodies of them as well. And so then I just started running that same letter every issue. And then all these people started saying, like I started fostering a screw Peter Bagg, and he's just a poser, and Seattle doesn't drink coffee, they drink milk. I don't know. It was so stupid and silly. The
Yeah.
letters were a lot of fun. And then I think there's a couple letters from prisoners in there. Maybe that was later issues, but my comics were filtering into prisons. And because of my name and before the internet, prisoners would think that I was a woman. So I would get these love letters from prison.
That's hilarious. Oh my god, that's so
Anyway,
funny.
it was a good time. It was a good
Yeah.
era.
So I mean, the book came out in the early '90s, right? So like that's to me, I mean, that's when I got into comics was the early '90s, and a lot was going on. You had the black and white '80s explosion, right? And then we had the '90s and like what turned into Image, and then the growth of the market, and it popped. So your
Yeah.
comic book started out at the beginning of it. How did you traverse and keep your comic book, like stay above water in that time? Like what was it like as a cartoonist for you, you know, producing comics in that time? Because you were self-publishing also, right? And then you also went through other publishers. I mean, I've done a little bit of research. I've seen like bits and pieces, like different, like Dark Horse's reprinted stuff as well. But
Yeah.
the early stuff was you, right?
Yeah. I did all sorts of tricks. I mean, like it, for one, like I started off with the mini comics and selling those and getting a ground, like a fan base, I guess. I don't know. But I was printing up like 10,000 of these mini comics and stapling them myself. And then I was working the comic books with my friends to do and we were doing a comic called Jab. And so we were able with that to get a little bit of notice. Like we did the first issue, and then that sold pretty good. Then the second issue sold terrible. We're like, okay, we need a gimmick. And that's when we shot the third issue with a gun. And that got us press. I mean, we took each comic book and put a gun, 22 long, a rifle, and we shot 5,000 comic books. And that was great, and then, but it gave like newspapers and like Wizard did a thing, but everybody just like, and we kept calling it too. They were like, this is the stupidest gimmick ever. And it partly was coming out of practicality, because to print a comic and do a gimmick, it's another like 5 or 10 cents cost per book. Shooting a bullets were about 3 cents each, and you could put it in stacks of 10. So it was a lot cheaper. I mean, we're just poor, right? Like, so we're like, what is a cheap gimmick we can do? And that was what we came up with. And then, so we put them in stacks of 10, and we took comics out into a field, and like a, Coen Brothers movie, just shot them in the head. And that got us press. It didn't sell, like we weren't like 100,000 copies, but it got us press. And then on that, I was able to leapfrog or step and say, okay, now I've got press, like from the guy that shot the comic, Here's Too Much Coffee Man, #1.
Hmm.
And the Turtles was still kind of going through a thing of like, everybody missed the boat on the Turtles, right? Like they put out this mini comic and then it got to be worth a lot. And retailers, if nothing else, are gamblers. They love horse races. So
It's
I
true.
couched my comic saying, this is the next Turtles. Don't miss out on the boat. And if you buy 10 of these, you'll get a animation cell from the upcoming cartoon, which didn't exist. I mean, it was like, but I wanted to create this illusion
Hmm.
that it was going to be a commercial, like a animation, like the Turtles was. And it was just a gag, and yeah, so I sold 10,000 plus of the first printing. And then I had to do 1,000 of these animation cells. They're still floating around. You can find them. So what I had friends over and I just bought beer and pizza and I would just draw random cells and then give them a random number in the top right. And I priced animation cells and they were like 9 or 18, 16 cents each, I think.
Hmm.
So I bought transparencies and then went down to an animation studio where they had a hole punch. So it's punched, so it looks like an animation cell. I just lied and cheated is what I
I thought,
did.
I mean, I don't know. I'm digging this story, man. I like hearing stuff like this because I talk to creators that self-publish right now. Like they do Kickstarter route or they just print stuff off at like a Kinko's or whatever, right? Or I talk to people that work for Marvel or DC. But I love hearing these stories of just like grassroots, just like getting your book out there, getting your stuff out there. It's inspiring, and I think it's a hilarious story to know that you said there was a cartoon and that you went through all that work to
I
make.
didn't say I never lied. Like I mean I lied by implying it, but I never said there was. I said the the potentially upcoming cartoon. So
Right.
I made sure that I wasn't going to be a complete a-hole. I was just like sort of an a-hole.
I mean, and you gave them the animation cells, so those
I did, yeah, and they were all hand drawn and hand painted, and so oddly, like that's worth more than if there actually had been a cartoon with
right.
Koreans doing this. I mean, these are the real, like, and I still see them up. And I knew that like a shop gets an animation cell, they're going to put it up on the wall and that acts as
Promotion.
advertising.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
promotion. Exactly. That's awesome, dude. That's awesome. I'm loving it. You
Then the weird thing is like a year later or 6 months later, I get a call from a advertising agency and they want to do a commercial. So then I did the Converse commercial with Danny Antonucci, and so I actually did get an animation following lying about it. I it actually kind of came to be in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Too Much Coffee Man would be a great animated series. Like I feel, especially like
It's hard. It's so there's a lot of internal dialogue and it's very much about an emotional landscape.
mhm.
And with animation, it works really well with physical humor, like I mean, animation is moving now more into emotional realms, but it was hard to translate. It was like Doonesbury doesn't go well into a animation, and
That's true.
it kind of sits in a similar vein.
Mm.
Oddly, doing the opera, it translated really well into opera, which I kind of shocked me.
Yeah, I mean that in and of itself is kind of funny. I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that because I just discovered that when I was doing some research talking about. I had no idea this was an opera. So, can you talk a little bit how that or how that came to be?
Yeah, it was a friend of my family's. He'd come over every Thanksgiving. He writes operas, and he always bugged me for years about doing one. And he's like, "Oh, let's do Too Much Coffee Man opera," and I was like, "No, that's like no way." And then at one point, like 5 years after him doing this, I had a dream where Too Much Coffee Man is singing like Bugs Bunny, and I woke up and I was thinking, God, it'd be so neat to do some kind of music thing with Too Much Coffee Man. Like, what could I do? And then and I was like, oh, if only I knew a musician that wrote music that I could do something. And then I realized, I was like, oh, this guy's been bugging me for 5 years to do an opera, and I want to do. And I was like, yeah, like that. I could do this. Like this is, and so I wrote a little piece, just a love song to love, which at the time I thought was totally original because I thought everybody loves coffee, or they love themselves, or they love a woman, or they love a man, or whatever,
Mm.
but nobody's like written an ode to odes, a love to, like I love love. And then just repeating that word, I love love, I love loving love, I love to love. I mean, it was meant to be saccharine and over the top. And I sent it to him, and he understood the how to make it pace, to make it funny. Like it really fit with my sense of humor. The way um there's like a Laurie Anderson song where she's doing like a phone about a answering machine phone call, and she does it where she lays a word, and then each word continues the sentence. Like it could end at that word, but then she adds another word as though the sentence continues. And I've always liked that structure, and I was like, oh, I could do that with the love song. So I sort of worked with that, but it worked. I mean, um, Danny, the composer, really got it, and so I said, yeah, let's do a whole opera. Let's write this thing and do it. And then I'm not the best at rhyming, and a buddy of mine who does poetry, I was like, hey, can you write this with me and work on rhyming and all that? It's like, yeah, sure. So I just was pulling in people, like any gap in my knowledge, I'd pull in people of like, okay, I'm gonna fill this out with people smarter than myself. And we ended up writing this thing. And then I was depressed. I was dating a ballerina, and then we broke up, and so I was totally bummed. So my friends like, come to my art show. So I'd been, just like holed up in my house for like a couple months or something. I don't know. And then so I dragged myself out, and his art show was in the same place where the ballet took place. So all of a sudden there were pictures of my ex-girlfriend all over the wall, like these giant 12-foot posters of the girl I dated. And I was just like, let me drink, so I was just got lit. And I met a woman there who, she's like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I do comics. And she's like, oh, that's great. And I was like, what do you do? And she goes, oh, I book this place. Like I'm the director, so I decide what shows happen at the art center. And I was like, oh, I just wrote an opera. Why don't I, would you like to hear it? So I pitched her this opera, yeah, only because I was drunk. I would
Yeah.
never. I mean, it was just such a rude nightmare. But I wake up in the morning and I have her card, and I was like, oh crap, what did I do? And then I realized, I was like, okay, I need to get out of my own head, and either I pitch this and I do this, or I don't. And I thought, pull yourself together. And so I called her up and I said, yeah, I am the guy with the opera. And she's like, oh yeah. And then she goes, well, send me the libretto, let me see what you got. And so I send her that, and then she's like, oh, that's all right, well, send me, you do have a score? So I send her the score. um do you have a recording of it? And so then I found a pianist, and I put out ads for a bass singer, um and I pulled them together and a guy to record it. So I record it and I send her 3 songs, like a little sampler. And she's, oh, that's great. Do you have ideas of like how to do this? And so then I drew up costumes, and then I drew up a set. And then she's like, yeah, we might be able to put it on in this. They had 5 performance spaces. And so I went and I broke into the space and I started drawing sketches of it. And then I saw that they had a little model there, so of the space.
Mhm.
And so then I went home and I sent her the sketches of the space, and I measured out the floor plan, and I did all that. So basically every week I did another piece of like, this is how I want to do this. And later, like we're opening night, we're sitting there, tipping our classes of like, hey, we did an opera. And she said that she gets pitched every day things, but it was my relentless, like she'd never seen anybody, like every week, every Monday, I sent her a new package with new stuff. Just relentlessly. I was like, I'm going to do this. And that's how I did it. And it was depression, it was just pure depression. Like, that's what it was. That's what drove me.
I mean, so you focus your energy into something positive, which I think is pretty dope,
Yeah, either that or else it's, along the vein, not across it.
I mean, I think that that's an awesome story, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important for people to not give up. You know what I mean? Like, even like I do it sometimes. Like, I mean, even just getting like an interview with a creator sometimes, I get told not right now, but I keep asking, and eventually sometimes I get the interviews, or it just never happens, and that's fine. But I have been told more than once, it was your persistence, which is why I said yes, because like, you showed that you really wanted to do it. So
Yeah.
I think that that's similar with your story. But
Yeah, the confidence of being an idiot.
yeah,
That's been my, driving life force for a long time.
with Too Much Coffee, man. Like, I know there's like, it seems like there's gaps when I look in terms of like the books being published, right? And I did notice on your Instagram, like, you have your Etsy and stuff, and you have some art on there that you can buy. And I mean, I looked for the omnibus, I can't find it because it's out of print. But
Yeah.
I was curious, like, could you have foreseen all those years ago when you created the character that this would still be a character that you would be known for, that you would still be continuing to draw in your daily life? Could you ever?
No, I don't know that I ever had a plan. I mean, I always think of like, this week, it will always be this week. And so it's hard. I never projected forward and thought, oh, this is what things will be in 10 years. And I should, because that would help everything. No, I mean, I liked cartoonists. Like when I saw, like you said, in the 80s, it was a revolution of comics. I mean, I'd fallen out of comics when I started having girlfriends in high school. And then in college, all of a sudden, like Moonshadow came out, and Love and Rockets, and Hate, which I loved, and Dan Klaus's stuff. It
Mhm.
was just like this. Yummy Fur with Chester Brown, like all these comics were coming out. I was like, oh wow, this is an art form that I'm interested in. It just had a breadth to it and and it had that feeling too of like, you could do anything. So that's kind of what I thought, is like, I want to do this art, and I want to do it in a way that's fun. Yeah, I didn't really see like, oh, this is the Cerebus that I want to do 300 issues of or something. It was just like, how do I keep this fun for me? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, a little bit. That's why I took Too Much Coffee Man. I did the mini comics, and I was like, oh, this is kind of hot. I've got this thing, but how do I do it in a way that keeps it engaging for me? And so that's why I broke it into 3 stories, where I was like, let me do some autobiographical stuff. Let me do a little soap opera where this guy's reading it, and let
Mhm.
me do the gag of Too Much Coffee Man.
Yeah.
And then I avoided coffee gags as much as I could, because that would run dry in one issue. There's 4 coffee gags, right?
Yeah.
But if I did the things that I love, in addition to that, like let me talk about fear of death and existentialism, and let me talk about insecurity, let me talk about these things that are inside me, then it would have so in a way it doesn't matter what I do. It's just like, as long as I'm doing this thing that's resonating with these ideas and kind of keeps me stimulated.
Mhm.
No, it was like doing the opera. It's like it was so many problems to solve. It was so engaging of like, how do I do this, and how do I, I'd watch opera on the arts channel on the back when we had dial TVs or whatever. You could get these odd channels that were the arts, and so I just watched opera. I was like, oh, I should have a duet. Like, oh, I need to
Yeah.
have a chorus that here. Like it was just like this whole world it was just neat. And I want that energy as much as I can find it. And it doesn't really matter where I get it, as long as I still can get that creativity.
Yeah, man. I mean, you also you were a contributor. I mean, I don't know if you're still doing the New Yorker.
Yeah. I took a break to do the Mueller report. And then, but yeah, I love the New Yorker. Was another one of those things of like, how do I do this? How do I get into this place? And I thought, oh yeah, I do comics. This is easy. And I've done single panel comics, but I worked with a guy, Matt Diffie, and he said he's a cartoonist there. And he was like, yeah, do you want me to help you? And I was like, yeah, that would be great. So I sent him comics and he'd give me these critiques. And it's really different. It's a different type of it's making these little puzzles, visual puzzles a lot of times. And then to avoid puns, I mean, things shift around with different editors there, but avoiding puns, don't do jokes about being overweight, homeless jokes are off the table. A drawing style that resonates, like not drawn too well, because that slows the eye and kind of ruins the humor, but not too sloppy. So you're not, I don't know. It's jazz is what I think of it as,
Hmm.
where it's like I've done punk rock by doing zines and doing, let's do gross stuff, but then, okay, you're going to play at the Blue Note. Like, let's figure out this new art form. And so it was good to do the New Yorker. And it got me, all of a sudden, instead of being the Too Much Coffee Man guy, I'm like, oh, New Yorker cartoonist. And it's a different, like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm out from underneath this rock.
Yeah. I mean, and what to you is most appealing about each type of like you publishing your own stuff, right? Doing that like grassroots stuff, as opposed to working for a magazine with like the reputation of the New Yorker.
It's pretty similar. I mean, the difference is that when I'm doing my own stuff, I'm completely unafraid to, no, that's not true. I'm totally afraid, but I'll get over it. Like I was doing Too Much Coffee Man and I hit issue 5, and I planned it out through issue 9, right? Like I wanted this arc, and I knew the arc, and I wanted the Too Much Coffee Man was just riffing, and I wanted the character that's reading the comic just to descend into hell, basically. And I wanted the guy that's drawing the comic to become rich and famous. So I had these plot lines, and I'm drawing issue 6, and I was like, this is so boring. I'm just like paint by numbers, like filling in, connecting dots. Like there's nothing energizing about this. And I thought, oh, I know, I'll skip an issue. like like I don't have to draw this if I don't want to. I'll just draw, like, what I want to draw is issue 7,
Hmm.
because that's where it gets interesting again. And I thought,
Yeah.
yeah, why don't I just do that? So I did it. I mean, I thought, this is funny because I'm creating the rarest comic books ever. And so I don't know. It was like, so that's self-publishing, is I'm able, or the I wanted to do a t-shirt with Too Much Coffee Man and using kanji. And I thought it was totally pretentious, because you're stealing 2,000 years of developing calligraphy, and you're just ripping it off to make your own crappy drawing look better, which
Mhm.
people do all the time. But I thought, yeah, that's how I can make my drawing look better with this, throw some Japanese writing on there and it looks cool, like almost no matter what, right? Like, so I thought, well, how can I do that and not be a poser, not be one of those guys I hate. And I thought I can do that if I licensed it to Japan, then that justifies it. But I don't know anybody in Japan. So I thought, well, maybe I could get a bootleg there. Like I could do the art and get somebody to print it there. That would justify it. And then I thought, why don't I just say I was bootlegged, pretend that this is somebody else's art, and then I'll bootleg this bootleg, and then I'll sell that. And it's like,
Mhm.
that's funny. And so that's something I can do as a self-publisher, but I could never pitch that and sell it to an editor or a publisher, I don't think.
Yeah.
They would say, oh, we'll get sued. Oh, we can't lie. Oh, that doesn't work. But it's funny. I mean, like it's to me, that's art. Like it's manipulating things in a way that is just weird and interesting. Um, so that's the difference is the lack of, I did a Too Much Coffee Man Saves the Universe for Dark Horse, and I wanted to have the cover be Too Much Coffee Man really tiny in a room that's just kind of has some crap in it, but basically completely depressed, where nothing is happening. It's just him sitting in a chair, tiny in a giant room. And the editor's like, no, you need to make it more exciting. You're competing with these other blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right. So I did, like breaking through the wall, Kool-Aid Man style or something. And I regret that. Like it's so much funnier to have the contrast of like Too Much Coffee Man Saves the Universe and nothing, like what's going on that he's just sitting there.
Yeah.
That's funny. Him breaking through the wall is like, that's just boring. It's like
Yeah.
everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's interesting, like the difference of like you being able to do whatever you want, and then there's an editor that puts their 2 cents in. And sometimes they're, like they have good suggestions, but I feel like sometimes they should just let the creative do what they think is best for their work, because like the fans that follow their work are going to appreciate stuff like that because they know what their the cartoonist or the whatever is trying to convey.
Working with other people, even shooting the comic, there was 4 of us, and we had to argue among ourselves about everything that wouldn't work. Like it'll be too expensive, the bullet won't go through enough comics, it'll damage the comics, and then the retailers will send it back because they got a damaged comic. A kid will try to copy what we did, shoot himself, and then we'll get sued. Like every possible stupid of like why we can't do it idea comes into play. And that's just with 4 of us, and we're all drunk, like that's the downside. The upside is, yeah, you've got somebody who's smarter than yourself as an editor, and they will fix your spelling and see things you don't see. So like when I worked with, I don't know, Diana Schutz or Bob Schreck, like these people, they know story, they know how to make this work. They know. And so pulling in an editor as like another person that will help you kind of arrange things, and editors can be great, and they should be. And I've had Philip is phenomenal now, and I've had some great editors that really have pushed me on the humor side of it. But yeah, the lawsuit fear is culturally, we really did ourselves a disservice in this culture for that whole, that like the Stella Liebeck cop, oh, sue him, oh, you'll get sued, oh, don't, oh, you got to copyright your character and that so you don't get sued, or oh, sue them because they've stolen this from you. So boring.
So like you went from self-publishing, you've published Dark Horse. Last book to come out was from Boom, right? So how did it end up at Boom? And also part two to that is, when can we expect maybe some new printings of this stuff, or some new stuff in the works that we can be on the lookout for Too Much Coffee Man?
Good questions. Well, okay. I actually IDW. I did the Mueller report with IDW.
Right.
And that was, but the last Too Much Coffee Man was Boom. Yeah. I've done. I mean, the pandemic. Like, I've cranked out. I have a Too Much Coffee Man book ready to go. And then Danny, the composer, said, "Hey, if I get this grant, would you want to do a third act of Too Much Coffee Man?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I guess." That I think, and so I've started drawing the opera as a comic book, which is kind of funny because the opera was based on, I think, what was it, the second issue? No, the second issue was cliche. The love issue, the fourth issue. Yeah, it was love. Each issue of the comic, I had a different theme. So I had like origin issue, death issue, a love issue. Like in the death issue, I killed Too Much Coffee Man on every even page, and I brought him back on every odd page. It was just like death, death, death. And then, but love was all about Too Much Coffee Man falling in love with a barista. And then I always liked that kind of the weird interpretations of Shakespeare bits. And one take on Romeo and Juliet is that they never actually loved each other, that they're teenagers that have a narcissism and they love themselves. And that's why, like, she has the mirror and blah, blah, blah. But that's their death is about, it's their narcissism that brings about their death. It isn't their love, which to me is great. It's such a cynical take. I just love it. I think it was an Elephant Man or something, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, I can think about these Shakespeare plays from a different angle, and they're a lot more interesting. But I liked that. I liked that Too Much Coffee Man falls in love with the barista, but it's really him falling in love with himself, and it's complete narcissism, and that he's basically a stalker. And then he finally he professes his love. Like, he works up this, so it's about, like, you think it's a story about, like Say Anything, where you have to like build up your self-confidence and then you triumph, right? But no, it's more like he builds up his self-confidence and it leads to ruin, because then she's like, oh, you're a stalker, like, and she's like, and he's like, oh, I want you to be my sidekick. I'm a superhero, be my side. And she's like, screw you, I'm my own superhero. And so she then, like, works a retail, she's like, screw this job, screw you, screw this, and she becomes her own superhero. So it's like, and that's the arc of the opera and the story. But I'm taking the opera and turning it back into the comic book, and I just did that as a lark. But it's been so fun and interesting because all the dialogue is worked out, and so now I can just really focus on the drawing, and it's a nice, like, palate cleanser after going through the Mueller report, which was just like the worst human beings in the world. Like, it was just I felt my soul was dirtied by reading about he who shall not be named, like, it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, this, and it might be gearing up for writing a third act and doing the opera again. And then the old connection from when I did the opera the first time, I saw her yesterday, and all of a sudden she's like, yeah, you think about doing the opera again? And I didn't even tell her about the third act. I was like, yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Like, that would be cool. So I don't know. So that would be another book, is a little opera book. I'm working a lot about, my dad had a commune when I was growing up, and I want to talk about that. And then also Jim Jones, who's the Kool-Aid guy. Like, I have memories of my mom and we went and saw him a few times when I was a kid. So I have memories of Jim Jones. And so, like, I want to talk about that. And then in college, oddly enough, Huey Newton was my landlord, and he was the leader of the Black Panthers in the 70s, and I rented from him in the 80s. But yeah, so I've got a Black Panther. So I've got these three kind of iconic 60s movements of hippie communes, and then the Jim Jones, and then the Black Panthers. And it's really these ideas of people that were wanting to change culture and how they went about it. So I mean, that's my ambitious piece that I want to do. I like what Durf's doing a lot with my friend Dahmer and the way that he did that. And I'll steal as much as I can from him on that, because I Durf and what he's doing, I'm just like so impressed by, because he's
Yeah.
taking these stories that are narratives and then using them as ways to do cultural commentary. And I just think that that's something that comics can do in a really beautiful way. And that's what I want to do. So I don't know, that's after I do my silly opera, then maybe I'll go back to do another graphic novel. But I'll have a
Yeah.
couple Coffee
Okay,
Man
cool,
books.
man. Yeah, man, I'm very excited to check all that out. Those books, that sounds really dope. I was imagining it in my head. So I'm definitely excited for all the stuff you got coming up. And can you talk a little bit, before I let you go, can you talk a little bit about like where we can find some of your stuff online, and where we can a little bit about your Etsy stuff or Etsy shop, and what we could expect, anybody looking on there type of stuff.
Yeah, online. I've been, I'm pretty without filters on Twitter and Pinterest and or Instagram, not Pinterest, Instagram. I throw up sketches and doodles and all that, and then Facebook, obviously. But yeah, the Etsy, I'm posting, like when I go down to see my mom, it's like, oh, here's a box of old stuff, and I'll throw up new comics and books on Etsy, and then I'm selling originals as I go.
Okay.
So yeah, the Etsy's great, and I guess you just Google it and find it. I don't know what it's like, Shannon Wheeler, something like that.
Okay.
I guess you could put links in the whatever's.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna drop all the links to your social media stuff, and it'll be down in the comments below for anybody listening or watching. And one last thing before I let you go, could you share maybe some of the books that you've read recently, some of the cartoonists that you've seen recently that have really stood out to you that you maybe want to recommend to people listening and watching?
Let's see. I just saw Jeff Lewis last night, so he's fresh in my mind. Jeffrey Lewis, he did a comic called Fluff, and is a musician. And so I don't know, he's like, I bought his collection a few months ago during the pandemic. Bechtel's new book I just picked up. I haven't read it yet. I've been reading a lot of National Lampoon, old cartoonists. Trotz and Bonnie just came out with a collection. And so I was reading through, like Gahan Wilson's Nuts, and then Trotz and Bonnie is just like, and I love stuff from other eras, because it gives such a perspective on what's happening now. And just to see like, oh, we are so completely uptight. We are basically Victorian in our sexual mores and our like what philosophical, like it's interesting that that we're so I read Trotz and Bonnie, and it's like wow, like outrageous and offensive. I mean, I'm just like, I don't know, it's hilarious. So good. She's one of my favorites. Let's see, yeah, the Trotz and Bonnie I highly recommend. Shoot, what's another one that I've picked up recently? I've been buying a lot of graphic novels and reading them. I like this Simon Hanselman. I've been reading his stuff on Instagram. Yeah, there's just like really some really good collections and stuff coming out. The Moon Shadow stuff, like revisiting things that I read when I was younger. It's
Mhm.
really interesting to see what holds up and what doesn't. Yeah, like a lot of the things that I loved when I was a kid, I'm just like, yeah, like it's. But then other things like Howard the Duck, I reread that and it's like, this is weirder than I remember. Like it was influential and weird when I was a kid, but now I read it's like, wow, this is genuinely weird. Like,
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, cool, man. Well, thank you for the Rex. Thank you for your time today. And like I said before, everybody listening and watching, I'm going to drop the links down to the social media accounts, drop the link to the Etsy so you guys can check that out as well. And Shannon, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me. It's been a pleasure, man.
it was my pleasure, and thank you so much. And I love the deep dive into the old stuff, and it was fun. I mean, like it was just a really fun. I've been very, very lucky in being able to do comics as a art form. So
Oh, yeah,
I
dude.
love it.
All right. Yeah, man. All right. Well, thank you, dude. I'd love to do this with you again sometime.
Anytime.